The morning briefing room buzzed with the strange mix of sounds that came from having 5 different species in one place. Commander Zixtal adjusted his breathing apparatus and watched the newest additions to his unit with careful eyes. 3 humans sat at the far end of the metal table, their soft pink skin looking fragile compared to the thick scales and chitinous armor of his regular troops. The humans had arrived 2 weeks ago as part of the new alliance treaty. Medical specialists, they called themselves. Zixtal had been told they were the best combat medics in known space, but looking at them now, he had serious doubts. They were so small, so breakable looking. No natural armor, no enhanced strength, no special abilities that he could see. The lead human was named Jake Martinez. He had dark hair and tired eyes that seemed to see everything. The female, Lisa Walker, kept checking a small device on her wrist every few minutes. The third one, Tony Garcia, looked like he had not slept in days. All 3 of them carried medical bags that seemed too heavy for their thin frames. Today we will review the mission parameters for the Kepler extraction, Zixtal announced in Galactic Standard. His voice translator made his words sound flat and mechanical. Intelligence suggests minimal resistance at the mining facility. Jake Martinez reached into his medical bag and pulled out a small device that looked like a pen. Without any explanation, he pressed it against his arm. There was a soft hiss, and Zixtal saw him inject a pale blue liquid under his skin. The human's pupils grew slightly larger, and he suddenly seemed more alert. Lieutenant Colonel Kreeshaw, the Altarian officer sitting across from the humans, made a sharp clicking sound with her mandibles. It was the Altarian equivalent of raising an eyebrow. Her 4 eyes focused on the injection device. "What was that substance, Medic Martinez?" she asked. Her translator gave her voice a buzzing quality. Jake looked up from putting the device away. "Standard combat preparation, ma'am. I require more specific information about chemical compounds being used by personnel under my command structure," Kreeshaw pressed. Her antennae twitched with what Zixtal recognized as suspicion. "It's a medical necessity," Jake replied calmly. "I inject it twice daily, as per my treatment protocol." Zixtal watched the exchange with growing concern. In his 40 years of military service, he had never seen soldiers inject themselves with unknown substances before missions. Was this some kind of human enhancement drug? Were they trying to gain an unfair advantage in combat situations? Lisa Walker also pulled out an injection device, but hers was different. It was yellow and black, and she held it like she was ready to use it at any moment. She did not inject herself, but Zixtal noticed she kept it within easy reach. "All human medical personnel carry enhancement drugs?" asked Major Drixcon, a hegemony warrior whose rocky skin was covered in battle scars. "They're medications," Tony Garcia said. His voice was quiet, almost weak. "We all have different medical needs." This answer did not satisfy anyone. Zixtal made a mental note to review the human medical files again. During the initial processing, the human medical records had been mostly blocked out, marked as classified personal health information. At the time, he had not thought much about it. Now he wondered what they were hiding. The briefing continued with tactical discussions and equipment checks. Zixtal noticed that the humans paid close attention to casualty estimates and evacuation procedures. They asked detailed questions about the types of injuries they might encounter and what medical facilities would be available. But what bothered him most was how the injection had changed Jake Martinez. The human had gone from looking tired and slightly unfocused to being sharp and alert. His hands, which had been slightly shaky before, were now perfectly steady. Whatever he had injected himself with had clearly affected his performance. After the briefing, Zixtal approached his second-in-command, Captain Veltar. The young Vrex officer had been watching the humans with the same suspicious expression. "What do you think of the human enhancement drugs?" Zixtal asked in their native language. "It concerns me, Commander. If they are using chemical enhancers, what does that say about their natural capabilities? And why do they refuse to share information about these substances?" Zixtal nodded. "I want you to monitor their behavior closely during the mission. Note any unusual performance or side effects." "Yes, sir. Should we restrict their access to these substances?" "Not yet. but keep detailed records. I may need to file a complaint with Coalition Command about proper disclosure of enhancement protocols." The next morning brought another briefing, and Zixtal watched carefully as Jake Martinez repeated the same injection ritual. This time, Lisa Walker also used an injection device, but hers contained a clear liquid. Tony Garcia swallowed several pills instead of injecting anything. The pattern was becoming clear. Before every mission briefing, before every training exercise, the humans prepared themselves with various chemicals. They were always secretive about it, always vague when asked for details. Other members of the command staff were starting to notice too. During a break in training exercises, Lieutenant Hexara from the Engineering Corps approached Zixtal with her concerns. "Commander, I have been observing the human medics. Their behavior suggests dependency on chemical substances. In my species, such behavior indicates serious addiction problems." Zixtal had been thinking the same thing. The humans seemed unable to function without their daily injections and pills. What kind of species needed chemical assistance just to perform basic duties? "I am preparing a formal inquiry," he told her. "We need to understand what we are dealing with before the first combat mission." But when he tried to access more detailed human medical files, he found them locked behind privacy protocols that required approval from 3 different coalition departments. The humans, it seemed, were very protective of their medical information. That evening, Zixtal watched Jake Martinez in the mess hall. The human ate very little, mostly picking at his food while checking the small device on his wrist. Every few minutes, he would look at it and make notes on a data pad. When he thought no one was watching, he pulled out another injection device and used it under the table. This was getting out of hand. Zixtal decided that tomorrow he would demand full disclosure of all substances being used by human personnel. If they were going into combat together, he needed to know if his medics were compromised by chemical dependencies. The first mission was only 3 days away. By then, he would have answers about what the humans were really injecting into themselves, and whether they could be trusted to perform their duties without chemical assistance. He had no idea how wrong his assumptions were, or how much those small injection devices would change everything he thought he knew about human courage. The dawn assault on the mining facility started exactly as planned. Commander Zixtal crouched behind a crystalline rock formation, watching his mixed forces advance through the purple mist that covered the planet's surface. The Vrek soldiers moved in their heavy battlesuits, their thick armor gleaming in the strange light. The Altarians used their energy shields, creating shimmering walls of protection as they advanced. The human medics moved differently. Jake Martinez ran between the advancing troops with nothing but a standard vest and his medical bag. No armor, no shields, no enhancement gear except for whatever chemicals he had injected that morning. Zixtal had watched him use 2 different injection devices before the mission started. Everything went wrong in the first 10 minutes. The intelligence had been completely incorrect. Instead of a small group of separatist miners, the facility was crawling with heavily armed rebels. Plasma fire erupted from hidden positions in the crystal caves. Energy beams cut through the air like deadly lightning. "Take cover!" Zixtal shouted into his communicator. His forces scattered behind rocks and metal barriers, but several soldiers were already down. The sound of weapons fire echoed off the cave walls, creating a deafening roar. Lieutenant Vexmore, one of his best Vrex warriors, screamed over the radio. His voice was full of pain. "I'm hit. Armor breach on my left side." Zixtal looked around desperately. Vexmore was pinned down in the open, 50 meters away from the nearest cover. Plasma bolts were hitting the ground all around him. Any rescue attempt would be suicide. Then Jake Martinez did something that made no sense. The human medic stood up from behind his cover and ran straight into the weapons fire. He carried his medical bag in one hand and some kind of emergency kit in the other. Plasma bolts seared the air around him, so close that Zixtal could see them burning the edges of his uniform. "What is he doing?" Captain Veltar shouted. "He's going to get himself killed." But Jake Martinez did not slow down. He reached Vexmore in less than 30 seconds, sliding behind the wounded soldier's position like he had done this 1,000 times before. The enemy fire immediately focused on their position, turning the ground around them into molten crystal. Zixtal watched in amazement through his scope. The human was working on Vexmore's wounds while explosions went off all around them. His hands were completely steady. There was no shaking, no panic, no sign that he was afraid of dying. "I need an emergency medical kit." Jake's voice came over the radio, calm and professional. "Vexmore has internal bleeding and his suit systems are failing." Lisa Walker was already moving. She ran from her position carrying a larger medical case. Her yellow and black injection device clipped to her belt where she could reach it quickly. Enemy fire followed her path, but she moved like the weapons did not exist. "Cover them," Zixtal ordered his troops. The Vrex and Altarian soldiers opened fire on the enemy positions, trying to draw attention away from the medics. Lisa reached Jake's position and immediately started unpacking surgical equipment. Zixtal could hardly believe what he was seeing. The two humans were performing emergency surgery in the middle of a firefight. Jake had cut open Vexmore's armor and was working inside the soldier's chest cavity while plasma bolts hit the ground inches away. "His main circulation system is damaged," Jake reported over the radio. "I need to repair the primary flow channels before he loses too much fluid." Vrex biology was completely different from human biology. Their bodies used a thick green fluid instead of blood, and their organs were arranged in ways that made no sense to most other species. But Jake Martinez was working like he had been fixing Vrex soldiers his entire life. How does he know Vrex anatomy so well? "Lieutenant Colonel," Krisha asked over the command channel. "All human medics study multiple species," Lisa answered while handing Jake surgical tools. "We prepare for this." The battle continued around them. Tony Garcia was treating wounded Altarian soldiers on the other side of the battlefield, running between positions with medical supplies. He moved more slowly than the other humans, and Zixtal noticed he stopped frequently to check something on his wrist device. "Garcia, report your status," Zixtal called. "I'm fine, Commander, just monitoring my blood chemistry levels. The stress of combat affects my metabolism." Zixtal did not understand what that meant, but Tony kept working. He treated 3 different species of wounded soldiers while explosions shook the ground beneath his feet. The most incredible moment came when Jake Martinez had to perform brain surgery on Vexmore. The Vrex soldier's helmet had been damaged and neural fluid was leaking from his skull. Without proper medical facilities, the operation should have been impossible. Jake pulled out a small injection device from his medical kit, but instead of using it on himself, he injected something directly into Vexmore's nervous system. The Vrex soldier immediately stopped convulsing. "What did you give him?" Zixtal demanded. "Neural stabilizer, modified from human insulin production methods. It will keep his brain function stable until we can get him to a proper medical facility." The human had just saved a Vrex life using modified human medicine. Zixtal had never heard of such a thing. The battle lasted 4 more hours. By the end, 12 soldiers were wounded and 3 were in critical condition. All of them survived, because of the human medics. As the troops prepared to evacuate the wounded, Zixtal watched Jake Martinez clean his surgical tools. The human's hands were covered in green Vrex blood and blue Altarian fluid. His uniform was torn and burned from near misses with enemy weapons. "Medic Martinez," Zixtal called, "your performance today was extraordinary, but I must ask about the chemical substances you use. They clearly enhance your abilities under stress." Jake looked up from his equipment. He seemed genuinely confused by the question. "Sir, I don't understand. What enhancement?" "The injections you give yourself before missions. They obviously improve your focus and eliminate fear responses." Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he started laughing, but it was not a happy sound. "Commander, I wish that was true. But those injections don't make me brave or focused. They just keep me alive long enough to do my job. I don't understand. My body doesn't work right without those chemicals. Without them, I would be unconscious or dead within hours. What you call enhancement, I call staying functional." Zixtal stared at the human medic. He had assumed the injections were making Jake superhuman. Instead, they were apparently just making him normally human. But if that was true, then what he had witnessed today was even more remarkable than he had thought. A person who needed chemical, Assistance just to stay alive had run into enemy fire to save soldiers from species he had never met before. He had performed impossible surgery while explosions went off around him, all while his own body was apparently trying to shut down without constant medical intervention. Zixtal realized he needed to completely reconsider everything he thought he knew about human courage. 3 months had passed since the mining facility disaster, and Commander Zixtal thought he was beginning to understand the humans better. Then came the mission briefing that changed everything. The target was a separatist prison complex on Tartarus 7, a death world where the very air would kill most coalition species within minutes. Enemy forces were holding 12 diplomatic prisoners, including 2 council members and a trade negotiator. The rescue had to happen fast, before the prisoners were moved to an even more secure location. Zixtal studied the mission files while his mixed command staff gathered in the briefing room. The prison was built into a mountainside, surrounded by automated defense systems and guard towers. Getting in would be hard enough. Getting out with prisoners would be nearly impossible. "Atmospheric composition is deadly," reported Lieutenant Colonel Krisha, her antennae twitching as she read from her data pad. "High sulfur content, toxic gas concentrations, and acid rain. Even our environmental suits will only last 6 hours maximum." Major Drixcon growled his concern. "Thermal imaging shows at least 200 enemy soldiers. They have heavy weapons and underground bunkers. This is not a rescue mission, this is a suicide mission." Zixtal nodded grimly. "Nevertheless, we have our orders. The diplomatic prisoners cannot be allowed to remain in enemy hands." He looked around the room at his officers. Vrex warriors in their thick armor, Altarian fighters with their energy weapons, hegemony troops with their rock-hard skin. All of them looked worried about the mission ahead. Then he looked at the human medics. Lisa Walker sat at her usual spot, but today something was different. She had not just brought her standard medical bag. Instead, she had a large case filled with injection devices, pill bottles, and monitoring equipment. As the briefing continued, Lisa opened her case and began preparing multiple injections. Zixtal counted 4 different devices, each containing a different colored liquid. She checked readings on 3 separate monitoring devices attached to her body. "Medic Walker," Lieutenant Colonel Krisha interrupted the tactical discussion. "What are you doing?" Lisa looked up from her preparations. "Getting ready for the mission, ma'am." "I count 4 injection devices. Are you planning to enhance your performance beyond normal human limits?" "No, ma'am. I'm planning to survive long, enough to treat wounded soldiers." Jake Martinez spoke up from across the table. "Sir, I think it's time we explained something about human medicine." Commander Zixtal leaned forward. Finally, he might get some real answers about these mysterious chemicals. "For the past 3 months, you've been watching us inject ourselves with various substances. You think we're using enhancement drugs to make ourselves better soldiers?" "That is correct," Zixtal confirmed. "Your performance under stress clearly exceeds normal biological parameters." Lisa Walker held up her first injection device. It contained a clear liquid that looked like water. "This is insulin. My body doesn't produce enough of it naturally. Without this injection every few hours, my blood sugar levels will spike and I'll go into a coma." She picked up the second device, which contained a pale yellow liquid. "This is epinephrine. I have severe allergic reactions to certain atmospheric conditions. If I'm exposed to the wrong chemicals and don't have this ready, my throat will close up and I'll suffocate." The third device held a pink liquid, hormone replacement therapy. "My endocrine system is damaged. Without these hormones, my body will start shutting down within 12 hours. She held up the fourth injection device. This one contained a clear liquid with a slight blue tint. "This is morphine. For when I get shot and need to keep working anyway." The briefing room fell completely silent. Zixtal stared at the human medic, trying to process what she had just told him. "You are saying these chemicals do not enhance your abilities?" "No, sir. They keep me alive. My body has multiple systems that don't work properly. Without constant medical intervention, I would be dead." Jake Martinez nodded and pulled out his own injection device. "My immune system attacks my own organs. This medication keeps it from killing me. The blue liquid you've seen me use is insulin mixed with immune suppressants. Tony Garcia looked even more tired than usual. I have a genetic condition that affects my muscle function and energy production. Without daily medication, I can barely walk, much less run around a battlefield treating wounded soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Krisha made a clicking sound of disbelief. You are telling us that you volunteer for combat missions while your bodies are actively failing? Yes, ma'am, Lisa replied simply. But why? Your species has billions of individuals. Surely you have medics who do not require constant chemical intervention to remain functional. Jake Martinez was quiet for a moment before answering. Yes, we do. But those medics don't understand what it's like to fight your own body every day just to stay alive. They don't know what it means to need help just to exist. I don't understand the relevance, Major Drixcon rumbled. When you're wounded on a battlefield, sir, you're fighting the same fight we fight every day. Your body is trying to shut down and you need help to keep going. We understand that fight better than anyone. Tony Garcia added, normal humans see a wounded soldier as broken. We see them as someone who needs the same kind of help we need every morning when we wake up. Zixtal felt like his understanding of everything had just been turned upside down. For months he had been watching humans who he thought were chemically enhanced super soldiers. Instead, he had been watching disabled people who refused to let their disabilities stop them from serving. The mission to Tartarus 7 will expose you to toxic atmosphere and extreme combat stress, he said slowly. Your medical conditions will be severely challenged. Lisa Walker was already programming her injection devices for extended operation. Yes, sir. That's why I'm preparing extra medications and backup monitoring systems. You could die if your medical equipment fails. Yes, sir. Same as anyone else on this mission. Jake Martinez stood up and gathered his medical supplies. Commander, with respect, you're missing the point. You think we're taking a bigger risk because our bodies don't work, right? But we've been managing life-threatening conditions since we were children. Combat is just another medical emergency that we have to manage. As the briefing ended and the troops prepared for departure, Zixtal watched the human medics with completely new eyes. They were not enhanced super soldiers. They were ordinary people with extraordinary determination. Lisa Walker injected herself with insulin while checking atmospheric readings for the mission. Jake Martinez swallowed pills while reviewing emergency surgical procedures. Tony Garcia attached a new monitoring device to his chest while studying the prison layout. They were preparing to risk their lives to save strangers, while simultaneously managing medical conditions that would have disabled most other species. For the first time, Zixtal began to understand why human medics were considered the best in known space. It was not because they were enhanced or improved, it was because they had spent their entire lives learning how to function when everything was going wrong. The toxic atmosphere of Tartarus 7 burned through their environmental suits faster than expected. Commander Zixtal checked his suit readings and saw that they had maybe 4 hours before the acid in the air would eat through the protective layers. Around him, his mixed forces moved carefully through the rocky terrain toward the prison complex. The human medics were struggling more than usual. Lisa Walker had to stop every 20 minutes to check her blood sugar levels and inject insulin. The stress of the hostile environment was making her medical condition worse. Jake Martinez moved more slowly than normal, and Zixtal could see him checking his wrist device constantly. Status report, Zixtal called over the radio. Prison complex. In sight, reported Captain Veltar from the advanced position. Guard towers are automated, but we can see movement in the lower levels. Human medics, report your condition. Functional but compromised, Jake replied honestly. The atmospheric pressure and toxic exposure are affecting our medical conditions. We're managing, but it's going to get harder. Tony Garcia's voice came over the radio, weaker than usual. My muscle function is declining faster than expected. I may need assistance carrying equipment soon. Any other commander would have ordered the medics to fall back. Their own medical needs were clearly becoming a liability in the hostile environment. But Zixtal had learned something important over the past few months about human determination. Proceed with the mission, he ordered. The assault began at noon. Automated defense systems opened fire as soon as they broke cover, filling the air with energy beams and explosive projectiles. The Vrek soldiers advanced behind their heavy shields while Altarian troops used their energy weapons to disable the guard towers. Everything was going according to plan until the first casualty. Lieutenant Hexara from the Engineering Corps stepped on a hidden mine. The explosion threw her 20 meters through the air and left her bleeding from multiple wounds. She landed in an open area where the automated guns could target her. "Medic needed," Captain Veltar shouted over the radio. "Hexara is down and badly wounded." Lisa Walker was already moving before anyone could stop her. She ran toward the wounded engineer while plasma bolts filled the air around her. But something was wrong. Zixtal could see her stumbling, moving erratically. "Walker, report your status." "Blood sugar is crashing," she replied through gritted teeth. "The stress and physical activity are burning through my glucose faster than expected." She reached Hexara's position and immediately began treating the wounded soldier. But Zixtal could see her hands shaking as she worked. The dangerous blood sugar levels were affecting her motor control. "I need to inject insulin," Lisa said, over the radio. "But I also need to inject glucose or I'm going to pass out. Can you continue treating the patient?" "Yes, sir, but I need to manage my medical condition at the same time." Zixtal watched in amazement as Lisa Walker performed emergency surgery on Lieutenant Hexara while simultaneously managing her own diabetes. She would work on the patient for a few minutes, then quickly check her blood sugar and inject medication, then return to the surgery. "This is incredible," Lieutenant Colonel Krisha whispered over the command channel. "She's fighting 2 medical emergencies at once." Jake Martinez reached their position and immediately began helping with the surgery. But he was also struggling. His autoimmune condition was being aggravated by the toxic atmosphere and combat stress. "My joints are starting to seize up," he reported, while working on Hexara's internal injuries. "The inflammation response is getting worse." "Do you need to withdraw?" "No, sir, I just need to adjust my medication." Jake pulled out an injection device and used it on himself while continuing to operate on the wounded soldier. He did not even pause in his work, treating his own medical emergency as just another routine procedure. Tony Garcia's situation was getting worse. The genetic condition that affected his muscle function was being accelerated by the hostile environment. Zixtal could see him struggling to carry his medical equipment. "Garcia, you are compromised. Fall back to the support position." "Negative, Commander. I have wounded soldiers to treat." "Your physical condition is deteriorating rapidly." "Sir, my physical condition has been deteriorating my entire life. This is just faster than usual." Tony continued moving forward, treating wounded soldiers despite his obvious physical limitations. When his legs started failing, he crawled. When he could no longer carry his full medical kit, he prioritized the most essential supplies. The breakthrough came when they reached the prison complex itself. The diplomatic prisoners were being held in underground cells that were partially flooded with toxic water. Several of the prisoners were unconscious from chemical exposure. "We need to get them out immediately," Jake reported after examining the first prisoner. "They're suffering from severe chemical poisoning. Can you treat them here?" "Not effectively, but I can keep them stable long enough to reach the extraction point. What happened next would stay with Zixtal for the rest of his military career." Jake Martinez used his own insulin medication, modified with additional compounds to treat chemical poisoning in an Altarian diplomat. The same medicine that kept his diabetes under control was apparently effective at neutralizing certain toxins. "How did you know that would work?" Zixtal asked. "Human insulin has been modified and adapted for treating multiple conditions. When you spend your life managing medical problems, you learn to find creative solutions." Lisa Walker was using her emergency epinephrine injectors to treat severe allergic reactions in 2 of the prisoners. The same medication she carried to prevent her own death was saving the lives of completely different species. "We're running low on medical supplies," Tony reported. "But we can keep the prisoners stable if we share our personal medications." "You're talking about using your own life-saving drugs to treat other people?" "Yes, sir, that's what medics do." The extraction took 4 hours. By the time they reached the transport ships, all 3 human medics were in serious medical distress. Lisa's blood sugar had crashed twice more. Jake's joints were so inflamed he could barely move. Tony's muscle function had deteriorated to the point where he needed assistance walking. But all 12 diplomatic prisoners were alive and stable. As the medical teams on the transport ship began treating everyone, Zixtal sat down next to Jake Martinez in the medical bay. The human was receiving intravenous medications while simultaneously being treated for combat injuries and atmospheric poisoning. Medic Martinez, I need to understand something. You used your own diabetes medication to treat alien chemical poisoning. You risked your own life by sharing medicine you need to survive. Jake looked tired but alert. Commander, when you have a medical condition that could kill you at any time, you learn that medicine is about solving problems with whatever tools you have available. But what if you had run out of insulin during the mission? Then I would have died doing my job, same as any other soldier. That's not the same thing. Other soldiers don't risk death just by participating in the mission. Jake was quiet for a moment. Sir, every person on that mission was risking death. The difference is that some of us are already fighting to stay alive before the mission even starts. Zixtal finally began to understand what he had been witnessing for months. The human medics were not enhanced super soldiers. They were people who had learned to be soldiers while already fighting the hardest battle of all, the battle against their own bodies. And they were winning both fights at the same time. The debriefing room felt different now. Commander Zixtal sat at his usual place at the head of the table, but everything had changed since that first meeting 6 months ago. The human medics still sat at the far end, still carried their medical bags, still prepared their daily injections before each briefing. But no one questioned them anymore. Jake Martinez pulled out his insulin injection device and used it without any explanation. Lisa Walker checked her blood sugar monitor and made notes on her datapad. Tony Garcia swallowed his daily pills and attached a fresh monitoring patch to his arm. The other officers in the room barely glanced at these activities. What had once seemed suspicious and dangerous now looked like simple medical maintenance. Mission reports from Tartarus 7 have been filed with Coalition Command, Zixtal announced. All diplomatic prisoners were successfully recovered with minimal casualties. Lieutenant Colonel Krisha clicked her mandibles in approval. The medical performance during that operation was exceptional. I am recommending commendations for all medical personnel. Agreed, rumbled Major Drixcon. The human medics performed far beyond expected parameters. Zixtal noticed that Jake Martinez looked uncomfortable with the praise. Sir, we were just doing our jobs. No, Medic Martinez. You were doing much more than that. After the briefing ended, most of the officers filed out to return to their duties. But Zixtal remained behind with the human medics. There was something he needed to say, something that had been building in his mind for months. I owe you all an apology, he began. Lisa Walker looked surprised. Sir? When you first arrived, I suspected you of using enhancement drugs. I thought you were chemically modifying yourselves to gain unfair advantages in combat. We know, Jake said quietly. It was pretty obvious. I was completely wrong. But more than that, I was wrong about what makes someone a good soldier. Tony Garcia, who was checking his muscle function readings, looked up with interest. What do you mean, Commander? For 40 years I have believed that the best soldiers are the strongest, the fastest, the most physically capable. I thought that any limitation or weakness made someone less effective in combat. Zixtal paused, choosing his words carefully. Watching. You three has taught me that I was thinking about it backwards. You are not good soldiers despite your medical conditions. You are exceptional soldiers because of them. I'm not sure I understand, Lisa said. Every morning you wake up and your bodies are trying to kill you. Your immune systems attack your organs. Your blood chemistry goes out of balance. Your muscles stop working properly. And every morning, you fight back with injections and pills and monitoring devices. He gestured toward their medical equipment. By the time you face an enemy on a battlefield, you have already won the hardest fight there is. You have defeated your own biology. Everything else is just another medical emergency to solve. Jake Martinez was quiet for a long moment. Commander, most people don't see it that way. They see us as broken or limited. Then most people are fools. Zixtal stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the base. Human soldiers were training with Rex and Altarian troops, working together as a unified force. I have sent my report to Coalition Command about human medical practices. Do you know what I wrote? Probably that we're a liability, Tony said with a bitter laugh. I wrote that human medics do not inject themselves with enhancement drugs. They inject themselves with courage. He turned back to face them. Every injection is an act of defiance against the universe itself. You refuse to accept that your bodies are failing. You refuse to accept limitations. You refuse to give up. Lisa Walker looked down at her insulin injector. It doesn't feel like courage. It just feels like staying alive. That is exactly what courage is. The choice to keep fighting when everything is against you. A few weeks later, Zixtal was reviewing the latest roster assignments when Captain Veltar approached him with a concerned expression. Commander, we have a problem with the new medical recruits. What kind of problem? They're asking about enhancement, protocols. They want to know what chemicals they should inject to improve their combat performance. Zixtal sighed deeply. Have you explained to them that human medics do not use enhancement drugs? Yes, sir. But they don't believe it. They think, we're hiding the real enhancement formulas. Send them to speak with Medic Martinez. He will explain the truth about human medical practices. Later that day, Zixtal walked past the medical bay and heard Jake Martinez talking to a group of young recruits from various species. This is insulin, Jake was saying, holding up his injection device. I inject it twice daily because my pancreas doesn't work properly. Without it, I would die within a few days. One of the recruits, a young hegemony soldier, raised his hand. But surely that enhances your performance in some way? It enhances my performance by keeping me alive, Jake replied patiently. The enhancement is that I can function at all, but you perform better than soldiers who don't need medical assistance. Jake was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When you live with a condition that could kill you at any moment, you learn not to waste time. You learn to focus on what's important. You learn that complaining about pain or fear or difficulty doesn't solve anything. He held up his medical bag. Every day, I have to solve the problem of staying alive. Combat is just another problem to solve, and I've gotten very good at solving problems. Another recruit asked, So you don't have any special advantages? I have one advantage, Jake admitted. I know what it feels like when your body stops working properly. When you're wounded on a battlefield and everything hurts and nothing works right, that feels normal to me. I can function in that situation because I've been functioning in that situation my entire life. Zixtal smiled and continued, walking. The young recruits were learning the same lesson he had learned. Human medics were not enhanced super soldiers. They were ordinary people who had learned to be extraordinary through necessity. That evening, Zixtal filed his weekly report with Coalition Command. Under the section marked Personnel Performance Evaluations, he wrote, Human medical personnel continue to exceed all expectations. Recommend expanding human medic assignments to all combat units. Note, human medics do not use performance enhancement drugs. They use life maintenance drugs. The difference is significant and should be understood by all command personnel. Pause before adding the final line. When selecting medics for dangerous assignments, priority should be given to those who understand that staying alive is the first battle that must be won every day. Outside his window, he could see Jake Martinez and Lisa Walker walking toward the mess hall, their medical bags slung over their shoulders. Tomorrow, there would be another mission, another crisis, another opportunity for them to prove that the greatest strength came not from perfect health, but from the refusal to let imperfect health define your limits. Zixtal had finally learned the most important lesson of his military career. The best soldiers were not those who never faced adversity, but those who faced it every single day and chose to fight anyway.